Alright guys, today we are going to be talking about the three branches of government, which, as you should know already, are the legislative branch, it's our lawmaking branch, it has the Congress in it, which is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The second branch is the executive branch, which has our presidency in it. And the third branch is our judicial branch, which gives the Supreme Court powers. The Constitution created each of these branches in the first 3 articles of the Constitution. Each branch gets its own article, and today we are going to be looking at the specific powers of each branch and what each branch looked like right at the beginning of our government and what each branch looks like now. So we are going to start. Before we start, you need to make sure you have your notes page for this. It should say at the top of it assignment number 14A and 14B at the top of your notes. It might just say 14A. And then just fill it in as we go through. Now, you do not have to write every single word that I write. I realize that it's going to be a little wordy, so if you need to shorten things, that's perfectly fine. You need to shorten words, make sure that you can still understand the words. For example, legislation can be LGIS, period. Government can be GOVT, period, etc. Shorten your words, cut out verbs. You know, make if I write sentences, make sure you just shorten them so you don't have as much to write. Okay. So the first one we're going to talk about is the legislative branch. The legislative branch has the House of Representatives and the Senate in it. It is those two things combined make up our Congress, and this is our lawmaking branch. The Constitution gives expressed powers of our legislative branch, and expressed powers are powers that are directly stated in the Constitution, and more specifically, the Constitution gives enumerated powers, which is powers, the express powers that are numbered 1 to 18 in the Constitution. And enumerated, of course, one way you can remember that is enumerated number, and they're numbered 1 to 18. So we're not going to look at all 18 of these powers. We're not going to look at them in depth. We're just going to list some of them off. And these powers are written in a few different categories. The first category is economic legislation powers. And there are 5 of these powers. Okay, the first one is to levy taxes. That means that the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives can pass laws that make American citizens pay taxes. It also borrows money, so it can borrow money from other countries. It can borrow money from citizens. Regulate commerce means that the legislative branch puts restrictions on our trade, on our economy. To coin money. We make money. That's it. We make they make coins. The Department of Treasury actually makes it, but the legislative branch tells it what kind of money it can make, how much it can make, etc. And then the legislative branch also has the power to punish counterfeiting. So if there are people counterfeiting money, the legislative branch can make laws that punish you. Moving on. Okay. The legislative branch also has powers related to defense. Okay. And there are 18 of these. We're not looking at all of them, even though it looks like we're looking at all of them. So the legislative branch has powers related to defense. First of all, it can punish piracies. So if you were a pirate out there in the ocean, then there are laws made against you, and you will get punished by the legislative branch. The legislative branch can declare war on other countries. The president himself cannot declare war. The Congress has to declare it. The Congress and legislative branch, same thing, can raise and support armed forces. So can raise our army. It can raise our Marine Corps. It can provide a navy. It can regulate armed forces. These all kind of go together. It can call forth militia, organize the militia. Those kind of go together too. Militia is now it would be called the National Guard. It's just kind of like a group of people that is waiting to go to war if needed, but isn't going to go. They're just practicing in the meantime. So it's kind of like a reserve. Militia is a group of ordinary men and women that would be able to go protect our country if we needed to, but they might not be in the Army or in the Navy or in the Marine Corps all the time. That's our militia. Okay. These are the last 5 powers of the legislative branch that we're looking at. The legislative branch to Congress has the power to naturalize citizens. So say that you come over here from Mexico, you're an immigrant. Congress makes laws and passes you through to be a citizen. It makes you a citizen. Establishing post office is done by Congress. Giving patents and copyrights, which, for example, if you were to create an invention, a patent would say, you would have to go to Congress and get a patent and say, this is my design, I made this invention, my design, my brain, my mind created this, and I'm claiming it. And so and you copyright it, so that if anyone else copied it, they would be punished by law. So you would go to the legislative branch, to Congress, to get those patents and copyrights. The Congress can also establish courts. So we have a Supreme Court, yes, but Congress can establish other courts if needed, lower courts. And then Congress is responsible for governing the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not a state. They don't have a state government. You think they're a state, but they're not. They are just a district in Northern Virginia, and they are governed by the Congress. Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry, I thought that was the last one. So the last power of the legislative branch is listed in the Elastic Clause. And the Elastic Clause, another name for it is Necessary and Proper Clause. And basically its purpose is just to let Congress stretch its powers to meet situations the founders could never have anticipated. So it lets Congress interpret things as they happen, because founding father, the world changes as the founding father, the world has changed since the founding fathers. Founding fathers could never have written in every possible situation that could have happened in America. So the founding fathers did give the legislative branch this right to, okay, if it's necessary, if we have to make a new law or overstretch our powers, if it's necessary and proper, then we can. And then the other branches help decide what exactly is necessary and proper. All right, if you look at Congress then, at the beginning of our government, around 1789, it was a lot different than what you have now. So Congress, which is, again, another term for the legislative branch, at that point, at the beginning, they only had 167 bills introduced. A bill is when the House of Representatives and Senate looks at a new item, maybe a new idea for a law, or like a petition, a new petition or something like that. So, this should say 10,000 right there. Sorry about the typo. It used to be only 167 bills introduced in the first year of Congress. And then 10,000 bills now, annually, every year, are introduced. So that's the stretch of the government has grown a lot. They're taking in more ideas every year. As far as the legislators, these are the people that work part-time, the representatives, the senators, the people. They worked part-time at the beginning of the government. They actually, some of them were wealthy enough to only work part-time, but then the other ones had other jobs. And now, legislators live and work year-round, nearly year-round in Washington, D.C. They'll take like a 1 or 2 month break during the year. Kind of like teachers, well, you know, the school year only goes for 10 months. The legislators only go for 10 months as well. The Congress then only had 4 permanent committees. Committees are smaller sections of, smaller groups of senators and representatives that have a smaller focus. So, for example, you can have a committee on Homeland Security. You can have a committee on women's rights. You can have a committee on race issues. Smaller focuses is what that would be on. And now you have 48 permanent committees. So if you look at the number 4 to 48, 200 years later, this shows that each committee is made based on something that's happened. And so, like, for example, now we have a climate change committee. The more things that happen, the more committees we're going to have. So a lot more things are happening than were happening at the dawn of our government. Okay, moving on to the executive branch. All right, the executive branch. The executive branch, we don't have as many powers listed as the legislative branch. They're very vague as well. So exactly what the Constitution says is this right here. The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. That's what it says. So the exact meaning of presidential power is open to interpretation depending on the situation. And that can be a little iffy sometimes. But there are a few powers that the Constitution does give. And these are them. Okay, in the first group we have military-related powers, and there are 2 of these. So the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and state militias. And the president commissions all military officers of the United States. So he tells the armed forces he has the last say in what the armed forces does, where they go, what missions they complete. He gets the final say-so on it. And then the commissions of the military officers, he decides and he verifies all military officers. The higher ranking officers. He will say if they deserve to be that and he'll sign off on it, commission them. Okay, another thing he does is he deals with appointments. And this is what I mean by appointment. So he appoints, and both of these are Senate consent. He can't just, well, I'll say that in a minute. So he appoints with Senate consent heads of executive departments. So we have in the country 14 executive departments. We have Department of Labor, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, etc., etc., etc. He appoints the leaders of those departments, but they have to be cleared through Senate, which is the legislative branch, as well, or which is part of Congress. So he can't just pick his friends to be heads, and then if the Senate says no, then his friends can't do it. So he wouldn't just pick his friends, but that's where you have the checks and balances. The Senate has to check what he does. This is the other one where the Senate has to do it. The president, I keep saying he, hope one day it'll be a she, as well. It could be a she as well. He appoints ambassadors, federal court judges, and other top officials. So ambassadors are people who go to other countries and work in embassies. They represent America overseas. Federal court judges, these Supreme Court judges, things like that. Those are appointed by the president. But Senate has to okay those actions. Okay, the third one is the powers where the president deals with the Congress. So the executive branch has to interact with Congress, and the first power he has is to deliver an annual State of the Union message. And you'll see this on like 8 channels every year. They'll trump whatever was on TV and show it. The State of the Union message and sends other messages. During the State of the Union, the president will say what he wants to go into action. For example, laws that he thinks should be passed by Congress. He'll give Congress the idea of what he wants, and then Congress will be taking notes and hopefully figuring out a plan to execute what he wants. And then Congress, he'll call Congress into special session if necessary. So if they need to meet on an emergency case or something like that, the president has the power to call them into session and to work. Also, the president, executive branch, ensures that the laws Congress passes are faithfully executed. So he lays out the plans of those laws, and then he makes sure that he has enough staff under him in the executive branch to carry out those laws and those plans. Moving on. Okay, he has other powers as well. And they are as follows. The president may pardon people convicted of federal crimes. He can also reduce jail sentences or fines for people. Now, I'm sure you have to have a pretty strong case to take that to the president, or else he'd be letting everybody out of jail. He can make treaties with other countries, but he has to use the advice and consent of the Senate. So he can't just go around and say, okay, I want this, without being unchecked. The Senate checks him, makes sure, the Senate proofreads what he's doing to make sure that he's not turning into a tyrant. The president, executive branch, can also meet with heads of state, ambassadors, and other foreign officials. So ambassadors, heads of state, those would be people that are working in other countries that come to America to represent their countries, and he will meet with them. For example, he recently hosted the leaders of China in the White House for a dinner. He'll do that from time to time, depending on who's in the country. And then they'll discuss plans for getting along and things like that. Okay, The presidency then versus the presidency now. George Washington, sorry about that typo, right there, whoop, okay. George Washington is the one that decided that 2 terms were enough. They didn't set an amount of terms, but at the end of when he retired, he said, I'm done. This 2 terms is long enough for anybody. When he was president, back at the beginning, he had a very loose schedule. So by loose schedule, I mean that he actually had time. George Washington actually would post in the newspapers when he would entertain guests. So he had this free time where he could just entertain whoever wanted to come visit him. He would have tea parties and things like that. And then presidents at the beginning of our government only actually had a handful of advisors and staff, whereas now the president has hundreds of people working under him, and that's in something called the federal bureaucracy. That just means the presidential staff. And now the president is different. There's no loose schedule. Their schedules are minute by minute, and they often work into the night, so it seems like the presidents now have a lot more work, a lot more time taken up than the president then. Okay, the judicial branch. So the judicial branch is actually the weakest branch of all of them, and you can tell this by the length that is written about it in the Constitution. So of the 3 articles, the first article being about the legislative branch, the second article being about the executive branch, the third article being about the judicial branch, that third article is by far the shortest. So that shows that they are the weakest branch. And Supreme Court justices, there are 8 Supreme Court justices. So there are 8 associate justices and then 1 chief justice. So 9 justices total. And justice would be another word for a judge. So the Supreme Court judges, they actually hold office for life. Whereas if you look at legislative branch, senator only holds office for 6 years at a time. They have to be reelected. Representatives take office for 2 years at a time, and the president takes office for 4 years at a time. So the fact that Supreme Court justices hold office for life, that shows that the founding fathers didn't really take them that seriously. They didn't think that Supreme Court justices would try to overrun their position. So they weren't fearing that they would turn tyrannical or anything like that, so they let them not have to be reelected over and over again. Okay, so the jurisdiction of the federal courts. I'll explain this in a second. Okay. Jurisdiction means the cases that a court can hear. So, for example, a federal court, say that you steal cigarettes from a gas station. You yourself, you do that. And you get charged and you have to go to court. The federal court would not hear your case because the federal court only hears the following cases. The U.S. laws, which is the federal laws. Treaties with foreign nations, interpretations of the Constitution, law of the sea, and bankruptcy. If you have a little bitty court case, a little bitty thing that you did that is being charged, it is not going to be heard by the federal courts. The jurisdiction of the federal courts is not to hear those things. The jurisdiction of federal courts is to hear things that are related to the U.S. government itself. Okay, federal courts, then federal courts now. So it's kind of sad. In 1800, when the government moved to Washington, D.C., John Adams moved into the White House. The legislative branch got the U.S. Capitol made for it. It could work in there, or the president could work in the White House. The judicial branch didn't get anything. So the Supreme Court didn't have a building of their own until 1935. That is insane! That is shocking to me. That it took over 135 years for the Supreme Court to actually get its own building. So it wasn't considered, I told you it was a weak branch at the time when it was first created. It wasn't considered worth much. It had a very humble beginning. But then in early 1800s, there was a specific Supreme Court case that changed that for them. It was called Marbury versus Madison, and it created this right here, the power of judicial review. The courts could now declare laws unconstitutional. And the fact that they could do this, it elevated the Supreme Court to a status where it balanced the other powers of the branches. And you do not have to write all of that down. Just get a little bit of it. Just get like a little summary of it. Okay. Here is your assignment. In your composition book, I want you to write examples of the branch's powers being used in our history. Do at least 5 powers. So you can make a table like this in your composition book. 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. At the top of the first row, put the branch. Middle column, put the power. Last column, write use in history. Now, I went ahead and started it for you. You can do whatever examples you want. I've given you like 30 powers to choose from in the notes. So put what branch you're working with. This is the one that stuck out in my head. So I'm going to do executive branch, and their power is that they can pardon prisoners, pardon people convicted of crimes. Then I'm going to use Google to look up an example of where this power has been used in history. So you could Google something like example of president pardoning prisoner, and then see what it says, and give a short blurb on it. I mean, it can be like 1-2 sentences. It can be very short, but give me maybe the year, the situation, the outcome, just something, a little summary of what happened. And do that for at least 5 powers. If you do any extras, that'll be extra credit. So think about that if you want some extra credit. And once you're done with this, just turn in your composition book and I'll get it graded as soon as possible. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.